Hello and welcome back to Z Sci-Fi Stories. We have to be honest with you today. YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to keep the lights on and our team paid. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our creators can pay their bills and keep bringing you these epic tales. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the video description and pinned comment. The crisis room of the Galactic Empire High Senate suffocated under a heavy, dead silence. Above the vast circular podium, a colossal holographic display relentlessly looped the final 42 seconds of the invincible 7th Battle Group. There were no frantic distress calls, and absolutely no deployed escape pods. In less than a single minute, over 10,000 elite warships were reduced to unrecognizable cosmic dust by a solitary, unregistered vessel. Every senator and high warlord in the chamber sat paralyzed. They were the undisputed rulers of 1,000,000 worlds. Yet, at this moment, they looked like terrified children staring into the abyss. The holographic projection offered no comfort. It showed no traditional warfare. There were no brilliant flashes of plasma batteries, no kinetic railgun slugs, and no blinding laser barrages. Instead, the footage displayed a battered, nameless ship plunging into the center of the Imperial blockade. Then, the nightmare began. The anomalous vessel did not fire a conventional weapon. It broke the universe. It unleashed a cascading gravity fracture. The Senate members watched, their breath hitching in their throats, as the fabric of space itself violently warped, folding inward like crushed parchment. A localized singularity bloomed from the unknown ship, projecting a shockwave of inverted gravity. The results were utterly catastrophic. Advanced kinetic shields shattered instantly. Mile-long dreadnoughts snapped in half as their own mass was weaponized against them. Heavy cruisers imploded under the sheer weight of the spatial distortion. The devastation was not limited to the fleet. A massive quadrant of the surrounding starfield was simply chewed up and swallowed, leaving behind a scarred, bleeding void in the cosmos. The Supreme Chancellor gripped the edge of his obsidian desk, his knuckles turning white. The crushing quiet of the room was finally shattered by the cold, synthetic articulation of the Empire Apex artificial intelligence. Tactical analysis complete, the AI echoed across the vaulted ceiling, its voice completely devoid of the horror it was describing. Residual faster than light, wake trajectory has been calculated. The hostile anomaly originates from the deep periphery, specifically Sector Null. This is an uncharted dead zone previously documented as highly toxic and completely incapable of sustaining complex biological evolution or advanced technological infrastructure. Complete panic erupted. The Senate floor devolved into a violent storm of shouting voices. Distinguished diplomats and scarred generals yelled over one another, their faces drained of blood. To the political elite of the empire, the message was painfully clear. This was not a random border skirmish or a desperate pirate raid. This was a grand, theatrical debut. An apex predator civilization, hungry for absolute conquest, had just kicked down the front door of the empire. Worse, they possessed technology that could bend the fundamental, immutable laws of physics to their absolute will. "We cannot attempt to parley with gods of destruction," the High Admiral of the fleet bellowed, his voice booming over the chaotic assembly as he slammed his heavy, armored fist onto the podium. "They just deleted our finest armada, as if they were swatting an insect. If this vessel is allowed to jump into the core worlds, our entire civilization will be erased in a matter of hours. Diplomacy is entirely off the table." The emergency vote was taken instantly and passed unanimously. There would be no negotiations. No messages of peace would be broadcast into the dark. Deep within the subterranean, heavily militarized shipyards of the capital planet, the Black Ops Armada was violently awakened from its slumber. A specialized ghost fleet of stealth destroyers, painted in light-absorbing Vanta Black and operating completely off the grid, silently slipped from their orbital moorings. The High Admiral issued their absolute, unyielding orders. They were to track the anomalous vessel through the abyss, engage with maximum prejudice, and extract the ship core technology by any means necessary before it could jump again. There would be no warning shots, and absolutely no prisoners. As the Phantom fleet vanished into the hyperlanes, leaving the capital system behind, a chilling question lingered heavily in the minds of every single senator locked in that crisis room. What kind of brutal, merciless biological creature sat at the helm of that nightmare ship, wielding the power to slaughter the stars themselves? Captain Easton Bruns dragged a heavy, grease-stained hand down his face, leaving a fresh, dark smear of synthetic motor oil across his jawline. The cramped bridge of the experimental stealth frigate, known as the Vanguard, felt more like a floating metal coffin than humanity's greatest technological achievement. The air inside the command center was thick and stagnant, reeking of scorched copper wiring, stale sweat, and the sharp, acidic tang of burnt ozone. Easton picked up a battered aluminum mug from his navigation console and took a long, punishing sip. The recycled coffee was lukewarm and tasted exactly like liquid rust, but he forced it down anyway. He had been awake for 48 straight hours, fueled by nothing but sheer adrenaline and a stubborn refusal to let his crew die in the dark. This was not the glorious maiden voyage the United Earth Command had promised them. They were not boldly charting new hyperlanes or establishing diplomatic contact with friendly alien worlds. They were hopelessly, catastrophically lost. Just 22 days ago, a massive quantum alignment failure inside their prototype, faster-than-light engine, had violently ripped them out of their intended trajectory. The resulting spatial misjump had thrown them entirely off the edge of all known human star maps, dumping the Vanguard into an empty, uncharted, and incredibly hostile sector of the cosmos. Easton slumped forward, resting his heavy elbows on the flickering tactical display. Just 3 hours earlier, they had been absolutely certain that the end had finally come. A colossal, invisible spatial anomaly had suddenly engulfed the ship. The science officer had frantically identified it as a localized dark matter storm, a violent cosmic hurricane of invisible mass that was slowly crushing the Vanguard like an empty aluminum soda can. The outer hull plating was groaning, and structural integrity was dropping by the second. With zero navigational control and no way to outrun the invisible tempest, Easton had authorized a desperate, blind gamble. He ordered the engineering team to manually discharge the localized gravity tether. It was a highly unstable, experimental payload originally designed to push massive, hazardous asteroids out of deep space shipping lanes. Easton had weaponized it, firing a concentrated pulse of anti-gravity directly into the eye of the storm. The blast had violently inverted the local physics, shattering the dark matter storm and sending a massive shockwave rippling through the void. It had worked perfectly. The storm dissipated instantly. Easton had watched the primary sensor screens light up with thousands of tiny, shattered metallic contacts in the immediate aftermath. "Well, we definitely cleared out that weird space weather," Easton had muttered to his crew at the time, letting out a breathless laugh. "Looks like we caught a massive field of wandering space junk in the blast radius, too. Lots of shattered metal out there. Good thing nobody was flying through that mess." He had wiped his brow, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just single-handedly atomized the most feared, elite military armada in the known universe. To Easton, he had just swatted away a bad cosmic thunderstorm and a floating garbage dump. But surviving the storm had come at a terrible cost. The Vanguard was now bleeding out. The tactical monitors sparked and flickered, casting harsh, erratic shadows across the bridge. The ship was falling apart around them. The overhead intercom crackled, spitting out a burst of harsh static before the voice of Chief Engineer Miller broke through. "Captain, I need you to listen to me." The primary reactor core housing is severely fractured. We are leaking plasma coolant at an alarming rate. Containment fields are holding at barely 15%. If I cannot find a way to patch this main vent line, the core is going to undergo a critical meltdown, and we will vaporize this entire grid. Easton pressed the communications button, keeping his voice impossibly calm and steady. He knew that panic was contagious, and as the captain, he had to be the anchor. Hold it together down there, Miller. I need you to reroute auxiliary power from the secondary environmental controls in Sector 4. Shut down the artificial gravity plating on decks 5 through 7. Nobody is walking down there right now anyway. Divert all of that juice directly to your containment fields. Buy me another 2 hours. I am rerouting the power now. Captain, Miller replied, coughing heavily into the microphone. But you need to know that the main oxygen recyclers are barely operating at 30% capacity. The air is getting incredibly thin down in engineering. My team is taping over ruptured pipes with emergency hull sealants, but it is just a bandage on a severed artery. Just keep breathing shallow, Chief, and keep slapping that tape on. We have survived a misjump. We survived being crushed by a storm. And we are not going to die from a leaky pipe today. Focus on the core. Bridge out. Easton released the button and rubbed his temples. He was relying on cheap mechanical tricks, duct tape, and a forced, desperate optimism to keep his crew of 86 terrified souls from completely giving up. Suddenly, the dead silence of the bridge was shattered by a harsh, piercing electronic shriek. The main proximity radar array, which had been completely dead for 3 weeks, suddenly lit up like a festival display. A brilliant, pulsing red warning light washed over Easton's exhausted face. "Report!" Easton barked, his spine snapping straight as years of military training instantly overrode his physical exhaustion. Ensign Sato, the young tactical officer, leaned so close to her monitor that her nose almost touched the glass. Her fingers flew across the manual keyboard. "Captain, I am reading massive, synchronized spatial disturbances. It is not natural phenomena. Radar contacts are appearing out of absolutely nowhere. We are being bombarded by high-frequency telemetry pings. Whatever they are holding position in a perfect spherical formation. We are completely surrounded." Instead of fear, a massive wave of overwhelming relief washed over Easton. He slumped back into his worn, cracked leather command chair and let out a long, heavy sigh. The crushing weight of the last 3 weeks lifted slightly from his shoulders. A genuine, weary smile broke through the grime and oil on his face. "Thank God," Easton said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Somebody finally picked up our automated distress beacon. Looks like a deep space search and rescue team finally tracked us down. Or maybe it is just a local cosmic highway patrol unit coming to issue us a heavy fine for loitering in unregistered space." He reached up and roughly straightened the collar of his ruined uniform, trying to look somewhat presentable for their saviors. "Sato, spin up the communications array. Open a universal, unencrypted broadcast channel. Let us get ready to say hello to our new friends and ask if they brought a tow cable." Supreme Commander Vale stood perfectly rigid on the obsidian command deck of the Imperial flagship, a vessel known only in whispered rumors as the Eclipse. Around her, 30 of the most lethal stealth destroyers ever constructed maintained absolute, perfect silence. They had formed an inescapable spherical blockade around the hostile anomaly. Their hulls were coated in hyper-advanced, light-absorbing metamaterials. Their engines ran cold, trapping 100% of their thermal emissions internally. To the rest of the universe, they did not exist. Through the massive armored viewport, Vielle analyzed the target. The alien vessel was aesthetically hideous. It was a jagged, asymmetric slab of dull gray metal, completely lacking the elegant, swept lines of Imperial engineering. Yet, Vielle knew better than to be deceived by its primitive exterior. This was the exact same Godkiller that had erased the invincible 7th Battle Group. "Report on target telemetry," Vielle ordered, her voice a low, commanding hiss. Her chief tactical officer, Sub-Commander Kalen, manipulated a holographic console with rapid precision. The anomaly is currently utilizing a Class 9 chaotic evasive paradigm. Supreme Commander. Its trajectory is entirely illogical. It drifts without power for several minutes, then executes a violent, asymmetric thruster burn, only to violently halt again. Our predictive algorithms cannot lock onto a definitive flight path. It is a masterpiece of unpredictable tactical maneuvering. Vile narrowed her eyes. The enemy was mocking them. The creature at the helm was dancing, proving that conventional targeting sensors were completely useless against its genius intellect. What the Empire interpreted as a masterclass in chaotic warfare was, in reality, Easton simply trying to restart a failing starboard thruster by violently kicking the control console. Supreme Commander, we have successfully sliced into their short-range internal communication network. The communications officer announced, "Our linguistic matrix is attempting to process the raw audio right now." "Put it on the main bridge speakers," Vile commanded. "Let us hear the voice of the butcher." Static filled the command center, followed by the harsh, guttural sounds of an entirely unknown language. The Imperial Translation Artificial Intelligence struggled for 5 agonizing seconds before synthesizing a translation in standard Imperial Gothic. The original phrase, spoken deep in the bowels of the Vanguard, was just an exhausted mechanic yelling over a loud fan. The engineer had said that if they did not vent the pressure from the damaged core immediately, they were going to blow up their immediate surrounding area. The Imperial Artificial Intelligence, missing the nuances of human exaggeration, delivered a horrifyingly literal translation to the bridge of the Eclipse. "Initiating total core purge," the cold, synthetic voice echoed. "Prepare to detonate the localized annihilation matrix. We will reduce this entire star system and all surrounding sectors to absolute ash." A thick bead of cold sweat rolled down the side of Vale's face. The bridge crew froze in sheer terror. The enemy knew they were there. Worse, the alien commander was entirely willing to sacrifice their own vessel to wipe out the entire Imperial stealth fleet and the surrounding planetary systems in one suicidal blast. "Hold all firing solutions immediately," Vile snapped, her heart hammering against her ribs. "If we breach their hull with conventional plasma fire, we might trigger their dead man switch. We cannot engage them in direct combat. Deploy the stasis snare. We will freeze their annihilation core before they can trigger the detonation." The stasis snare was the most expensive and closely guarded technology in the Imperial arsenal. It was not a weapon of destruction, but a weapon of absolute capture. In perfect synchronization, the 30 stealth destroyers powered up their hidden forward emitters. Invisible beams of zero-point energy shot across the void, intertwining and wrapping around the Vanguard in a brilliant, glowing web of azure light. The kinetic energy of the human ship was instantly drained to zero. The snare locked the vessel in a frozen bubble of localized spacetime, freezing every single atom in place. Inside the cramped bridge of the Vanguard, the tactical screens suddenly flared bright blue before completely freezing. The ship lurched violently, stopping dead in its tracks. The hum of the failing engines ground to an eerie, unnatural halt. Easton groaned loudly, throwing his head back against his cracked leather chair. "Are you kidding me? Another localized magnetic storm? We just escaped a dark matter hurricane. And now we are caught in a deep space electromagnetic mud pit." "Captain, the primary thrusters are completely locked up," Ensign Sato reported frantically. "We are caught in some kind of massive external energy field." Easton sighed. His patience completely evaporated. He did not have time to wait for a natural magnetic anomaly to pass. "All right, forget this. I am not sitting here while our life support drains. Override the safety protocols. I am pulling a blind microjump. We will just punch our way out of this static interference." Outside, Vile watched the azure web holding strong. She allowed herself a small breath of relief. The beast was finally caged. Then, the impossible happened. Easton reached down and violently yanked the manual hyperdrive override lever. The Vanguard did not calculate a precise hyperlane entry. It simply brute-forced a raw tear in the fabric of space. The primitive, crude nature of the human jump drive surged against the elegant, delicate quantum mechanics of the Imperial stasis snare. The snare was designed to hold highly advanced, logical technology. It was absolutely not designed to handle a ship violently ripping a hole in reality out of pure frustration. The azure web shattered like fragile glass. A massive electromagnetic feedback loop screamed back up the tether beams directly into the Imperial stealth fleet. The overwhelming surge overloaded the power grids of all 30 destroyers simultaneously. On the bridge of the Eclipse, command consoles exploded in a shower of sparks. The lights flickered and died. Most horrifying of all, the stealth cloaking generators catastrophically failed. Across the void, the light-absorbing camouflage melted away. The void of space, previously empty starlight, was violently choked by the sudden manifestation of 30 massive, heavily armed leviathans. Completely stripped of their shadows, they revealed a perfect, inescapable ring of midnight black dreadnoughts surrounding the tiny, battered hull of the Vanguard. Every single plasma battery, kinetic railgun, and heavy laser cannon across the entire Imperial formation glowed with blinding, lethal energy. Thousands of targeting lasers converged directly on the human ship, painting its dull gray hull with angry red dots of impending doom. Aboard the flagship Eclipse, Supreme Commander Vale gripped the obsidian command console, her knuckles turning bone white under the harsh emergency lighting. She braced her body against the inevitable impact. The snare had failed. The monster was free from its cage. She stared unblinking at the ugly, jagged metal box floating silently before her, waiting for the devastating wave of inverted gravity to tear her majestic flagship apart. She had failed her Emperor, but she would die standing with her eyes wide open. Inside that jagged metal box, Captain Easton Bruns nearly choked on his mouthful of stale coffee. The main view screen, which just seconds ago showed nothing but static interference, was now filled with the terrifying, glowing maws of dozens of massive alien weapons. The sheer, overwhelming scale of the unknown warships dwarfed the Vanguard, making his experimental frigate look like a floating tin can surrounded by heavily armed apex predators. Easton blinked hard, his exhausted, sleep-deprived brain struggling to process the sudden, ridiculous escalation of their already terrible situation. He leaned back in his creaking leather chair, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. "Man, the local sector police around here are seriously over-equipped," Easton muttered, wiping a fresh, dark smear of engine grease from his forehead. "I guess they really do not mess around with loitering violations in this neighborhood." He slapped the side of his console, completely ignoring the blaring, flashing red warning lights that indicated multiple high-yield target locks. "Ensign Sato, open a universal, unencrypted hailing frequency. Audio only. Let us be polite and see if we can talk our way out of a parking ticket." The communications array hummed to life with a sharp crackle of static. Easton cleared his throat, leaning casually close to the microphone. "Hello there, officers. We seem to have gotten a little turned around. Mind giving us a lift to the nearest service station?" Across the deadly divide, the Imperial linguistic matrix intercepted the unencrypted analog signal. The translation, artificial intelligence, already critically destabilized by the hyperdrive feedback loop and entirely unfamiliar with the casual, colloquial slang of human English, suffered a catastrophic processing failure. It desperately attempted to parse the concepts of a lift and a service station through its strictly militaristic and highly aggressive database. The resulting output was horrifying. The bridge of the Eclipse echoed with a distorted, demonic synthetic voice that sent a chill through the entire crew. "Welcome, Death. Your time of absolute termination has arrived. Vile felt a cold drop of sweat trace down her spine. The beast was not just going to kill them. It was actively taunting them before the slaughter. The sheer, terrifying arrogance of the creature was paralyzing. She closed her eyes, accepting her grim fate, and raised her right hand high into the air. All vessels, lock firing solutions. Open fire and burn it to ash. Before a single plasma bolt could be unleashed from the Imperial cannons, the universe itself screamed in agony. The fabric of space directly above the Imperial formation did not just tear. It shattered like a fragile pane of glass struck by a cosmic sledgehammer. A colossal rift, bleeding dark purple and violent crimson light, ripped open, casting terrifying, unnatural shadows across the hulls of the warships. Out of the chaotic dimensional tear slithered a nightmare of unfathomable proportions. It was the dark matter entity. It had not been destroyed by the gravity blast earlier. It had only been displaced into the interstitial void, and it had ravenously followed the exotic energy wake of the Vanguard's microjump. This time, it was utterly furious, and it was over 100 times larger than its previous form. It was a sprawling, writhing mass of pure, hungry void, swirling with the screaming remnants of dead stars and crushed planets. Massive, ethereal tentacles composed of antimatter and hyper-dense gravity whipped out from the central mass. The creature completely ignored the tiny, insignificant Earthship, plunging its appendages directly toward the largest, most delicious energy signatures in the sector. The massive tentacles slammed violently into the eclipse, wrapping tightly around the colossal Imperial flagship, like a deep sea predator, dragging a helpless whale into the crushing abyss. The Imperial Armada immediately broke their disciplined formation, turning their weapons away from the Vanguard and firing blindly into the writhing mass of shadow above them. Thick beams of superheated plasma and hypervelocity kinetic slugs slammed into the entity, only to be instantly absorbed and consumed by the shifting dark matter without leaving a single scratch. Defenseless sirens wailed endlessly across the bridge of the eclipse. "Deflector shields are dropping at a catastrophic rate," the tactical officer screamed, over the deafening groan of the flagship's buckling armor. "We are at 80%, 50%, 20%. Shields are at 0%. It is draining our main reactor core directly." In that horrifying, chaotic instant, as her proud ship was being slowly crushed into debris, Val finally realized the agonizing truth. The little, ugly gray ship was not the monster. This writhing horror of dark matter was the god killer that had slaughtered the 7th Battle Group. They had cornered the wrong prey, and now they were going to be eaten alive. Aboard the Vanguard, Easton sat in stunned silence, watching the colossal dark matter squid completely bypass his pathetic little ship to devour the massive black dreadnoughts. The terrifying, beautiful, and highly lethal light shone reflected brightly in his dark, tired eyes. The sheer absurdity of the universe had finally reached its peak. He slammed his closed fist down on the metal console, uttering a harsh, biting curse. He reached forward and tightly gripped the heavy, manual steering yoke of the ship, the exhaustion vanishing from his posture. "All right, everyone," Easton barked, his voice suddenly sharp, hardened, and radiating absolute command. "Cancel the hitchhiking plan. Secure yourselves to your stations and prepare for immediate combat." Captain Easton Bruns shoved the heavy manual throttle entirely forward, bypassing every single safety protocol programmed into the navigation computer. Instead of turning the ship around and initiating an emergency jump into the safety of the empty void, he violently piloted the crippled Vanguard directly into the heart of the chaotic maelstrom. The tiny human stealth frigate groaned in horrific mechanical protest as its main sublight engines flared with desperate, sputtering thrust. It was a completely suicidal charge. The massive dark matter entity had already wrapped its thickest, most corrosive gravity tentacles tightly around the midsection of the Imperial flagship, aggressively draining the immense power reserves of the alien dreadnought. Easton aimed the reinforced, ablative titanium nose of his ship right at the exact center of that devastating connection. He did not order the firing of any conventional weapons. He used his entire ship as a gigantic physical battering ram. The Vanguard slammed violently through the dense antimatter appendages. The sheer, blunt kinetic force of the human vessel severed the ethereal tethers, temporarily freeing the colossal black dreadnought from the crushing grip of the cosmic beast. Blinding sparks and massive chunks of sheared armor plating trailed behind the Earthship like the tail of a dying comet. "Miller, I need absolutely everything you have down there," Easton roared over the deafening metallic scream of twisting bulkheads. "Kill the environmental life support systems right now. Shut down the atmospheric heating coils. Cut the artificial lights. And stop pumping oxygen into the ventilation shafts. Give me 100% of our remaining electrical juice and route it directly into the exterior physical kinetic barriers. Do it immediately." Deep below the main deck, the terrified engineering crew did not hesitate for a single second. The interior of the Vanguard plunged instantly into absolute, pitch-black darkness, illuminated only by the frantic, pulsing crimson glow of the emergency battery floor lights. The ambient temperature inside the bridge plummeted rapidly toward absolute zero. Thick white frost began to rapidly crystallize across the shattered control consoles and along the edges of Easton's tactical visor. Breathing became incredibly labored and painful as the main oxygen recyclers ground to a permanent, heavy halt. The crew was forced to take shallow, freezing breaths, their lungs burning with every inhalation. However, outside the battered hull, the primitive, localized kinetic displacement shields surged to life with a violent hum. Unlike the highly advanced, elegant quantum energy shields of the Empire, which the dark matter entity easily consumed like water, the crude human barriers were little more than violently vibrating fields of sheer physical kinetic force. When the dark matter beast lashed out with fresh, hungry tentacles to drain the Vanguard, the appendages simply ricocheted off the rapidly vibrating kinetic wall. The primitive human technology acted as a solid brick wall against a creature that only understood how to consume pure radiant energy. Aboard the severely crippled command deck of the Eclipse, Supreme Commander Vile watched her tactical holographic monitors in a state of absolute, paralyzing disbelief. The jagged, ugly alien vessel had just intentionally wedged itself between her majestic flagship and certain annihilation. The so-called doomsday monster was not fleeing into the night. It was actively taking the lethal, crushing blows meant for the very people who had just tried to execute it moments prior. The human ship was being brutally battered from all sides. Its outer hull was actively crumpling inward, and structural integrity alarms wailed continuously across the Imperial bridge, broadcasting the rapid, unavoidable death of their tiny savior. Vielle had spent her entire life serving an ancient empire that conquered, subjugated, and destroyed. The fundamental concept of an unknown, terrifyingly powerful species risking its own total destruction to shield an aggressive enemy was completely alien to her strict military doctrine. Her elite bridge crew stood entirely frozen, watching the battered gray hull take hit after devastating hit, absorbing massive gravitational shockwaves that would have undoubtedly cracked the Eclipse entirely in half. Back on the freezing, suffocating bridge of the Vanguard, Easton realized with grim certainty that playing defense was a guaranteed death sentence. Their kinetic shields were miraculously holding the line, but the sheer power drain on the failing reactor was astronomical. They had maybe 3 minutes left before the barriers collapsed entirely and the ship was crushed into subatomic dust. Firing their conventional railguns or launching physical missiles would be entirely useless against a cosmic being constructed entirely of negative space and violent gravity. He needed to blow the creature apart from the absolute inside out. "Sato!" "Listen to me," Easton yelled, his breath forming thick, swirling clouds of white vapor in the freezing, dead air. "We cannot shoot this thing to death. We have to feed it something it absolutely cannot digest. I am going to manually eject our unstable, faster-than-light reactor core straight down its throat. But we need a massive detonator. We need something to spark the core from the outside before the beast fully absorbs it." He knew the surrounding Imperial fleet possessed the overwhelming firepower required. But the translation matrix between their ships was completely ruined. Attempting to send spoken words would only cause more catastrophic misunderstandings. Easton reached over and tapped directly into the primary navigational targeting computer. He aggressively stripped away all linguistic coding, all grammatical syntax, and all cultural formatting. He compiled a raw, unencrypted burst of pure, universal mathematics. He meticulously calculated a highly precise, three-dimensional spatial coordinate, placing the exact location perfectly centered within the gaping, swirling maw of the dark matter entity. Attached to those raw coordinates was a strictly synchronized numeric countdown timer. It was the fundamental, universal language of the cosmos, pure geometry, and temporal mechanics. He ordered Ensign Sato to broadcast the heavy data packet on all available frequencies, beaming the pure numbers directly into the mainframe of the massive black flagship hovering behind them. On the dark Imperial bridge, the tactical consoles chimed with a sharp, piercing tone. A singular, highly concentrated data packet completely bypassed the broken translation software and materialized brightly on Vale's primary holographic display. It was not a threat, and it was not a demand for surrender. It was a pristine mathematical blueprint. 3 distinct geometric axes, representing a precise location in local space, accompanied by a rapidly decreasing numeric sequence that dropped relentlessly toward zero. "Supreme Commander," Sub-Commander Kalen urged, his voice trembling slightly under the immense pressure. "Imperial doctrine explicitly and strictly forbids unauthorized tactical synchronization with an unclassified alien intelligence. To align our primary weapons with their raw telemetry is a direct act of high treason against the Senate." Vale stared intensely at the shrinking numbers glowing on the screen. 10 seconds. 9 seconds. 8 seconds. She looked up through the shattered viewport at the tiny, freezing ship that was currently sacrificing itself to keep her crew alive. The ancient law of the Empire was rigid, but the reality of sheer survival was absolute. She made the heaviest, most consequential choice of her entire military career. "To the darkest abyss with the doctrine," Vile commanded, her voice cutting through the rising panic of the bridge like a newly sharpened blade. "That unknown, crazy commander just handed us the exact mathematical coordinates of the beast's heart. Route every single drop of our remaining power directly to the forward heavy plasma batteries. Transmit this exact telemetry to the entire surviving fleet immediately. Sync all of our firing solutions to that exact three-dimensional point in space. When that timer hits absolute zero, we fire absolutely everything we have." The countdown timer synchronized across both fleets plummeted toward zero. 3, 2, 1, 0. Captain Easton Bruns slammed his fist onto the manual emergency release console. Deep within the agonizing belly of the Vanguard, explosive bolts detonated in perfect sequence. The massively unstable, critical faster-than-light reactor core was violently ejected from the bottom of the ship, plunging directly into the swirling, abyssal throat of the cosmic entity. At that exact millisecond, the entire surviving Imperial Black Ops Armada fired. 30 massive columns of concentrated, superheated plasma and hypervelocity kinetic energy lanced across the dark void. They bypassed the struggling Earth frigate entirely, converging with flawless mathematical precision directly onto the plummeting reactor core. The resulting reaction did not simply create a massive explosion. It temporarily broke the fundamental laws of reality. The overwhelming influx of Imperial weapon energy, colliding with the highly unstable human hyperdrive matrix, triggered a violent spatial collapse. For one single, terrifying millisecond, a microscopic artificial black hole was born. It bloomed in the center of the dark matter entity like an infinitely dark, silent star. The gravitational pull of the singularity was absolute. The writhing, titanic tentacles of negative space were instantly sucked backward, collapsing inward as the cosmic beast was violently devoured by its own weaponized physics. The entity let out a silent, rippling shockwave of pure agony before the artificial singularity evaporated, erasing the monster from existence entirely. However, the resulting kinetic shockwave of reality snapping back into place was apocalyptic. The concussive blast hit the Vanguard like a physical tidal wave. The human ship was violently hurled backward, spinning wildly out of control. Inside the bridge, the artificial gravity generators completely failed. Easton and his crew were thrown viciously against their restraining harnesses as loose tools, shattered glass, and frozen condensation floated chaotically through the freezing, pitch-black air. The structural integrity alarms screamed their final warning. The hull was fracturing. The Vanguard was going to be ripped into a million pieces. Easton closed his eyes, accepting that he had finally pushed his luck too far. Suddenly, the violent spinning halted. The agonizing groan of tearing metal ceased. A warm, radiant azure light flooded the frozen bridge of the Vanguard, casting soft shadows across the floating debris. Easton opened his eyes and looked out the shattered viewport. The immense, heavily armored Imperial flagship had surged forward. Supreme Commander Vile had pushed her own vessel to the absolute limit, violently extending her primary quantum deflector shields outward to completely envelop the tiny, dying Earthship in a protective, glowing embrace. As the cosmic dust slowly settled and the violent spatial ripples faded into an eerie calm, the communication arrays aboard the Eclipse chimed softly. The Imperial language engineers had frantically worked through the catastrophic translation feedback loop and finally synchronized the linguistic codes. Vile stood completely rigid on her command deck, surrounded by the smoking ruins of her consoles, waiting to hear the profound, terrifying voice of the ultimate warrior species. The universal channel clicked open. A long, incredibly tired yawn echoed across the bridge of the Imperial flagship. "Well, thanks for the umbrella," Easton muttered, his voice casually echoing over the speakers, entirely devoid of any conqueror's malice. "We are completely out of gas. Our heating is dead, and my coffee is frozen. Do you guys happen to have a heavy-duty tow cable?" Light years away, the crisis room of the Galactic Empire High Senate was once again submerged in absolute silence. They had watched the entire engagement through the live telemetry feeds. This silence, however, was entirely different from the paralyzing terror they had experienced hours earlier. This was a profound, overwhelming awe. The political elite of the galaxy stared at the ugly, shattered little metal box floating safely inside their flagship's shield. The profound realization washed over the politicians and warlords alike. Humanity was not a pantheon of bloodthirsty gods eager to conquer the stars. They were an absolutely reckless, beautifully insane species who would weaponize their own catastrophic engineering failures and sacrifice their own lives to protect complete strangers. The story of the Vanguard ended, not with a grand declaration of war, but with a surreal, magnificent procession. The Great Black Ops Armada, originally sent to slaughter a cosmic horror, solemnly escorted the battered, ugly human frigate back toward the core worlds as an honored, highly revered guest. It marked the dawn of the most bizarre, unpredictable, and powerful alliance the universe had ever witnessed. Supreme Commander Vale stood quietly at her viewport, watching the tiny human ship coast securely within her shields. She opened a direct text channel to the High Senate, transmitting a single, deeply profound official report. They are not in our records, and we should thank the stars for that. Thank you so very much for tuning in and listening to our story today. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from. So please let us know in the comments section. As we mentioned at the beginning, our channel is entirely demonetized by YouTube, and we rely completely on your generosity to keep creating. If you enjoyed this cosmic adventure, please consider supporting us with just $1. Your kindness directly allows us to pay our dedicated staff, help them feed their families, and keep bringing you even more epic sci-fi tales. You can easily help out by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by using the PayPal link provided in the video description and pinned comment. Thank you again. Stay safe out there in the galaxy, and we will see you in the next story.